said, my name is Ian Driver. I'm responsible for education and engagement at the Performing Arts Center at Purchase College. I set up this call and I'm sharing the Zoom hosting responsibilities with our host, Seth Soloway, this morning. So let's begin. I'd like to introduce our moderators this morning as briefly as I can in the time, but I could take double the time. But I want to welcome firstly Irwin Moss. Erwin is a New York-based theater maker, educator, and international arts advocate from the Netherlands. He has worked extensively in Australia, Europe, South Africa, South Korea, and USA. In New York, he directs numerous productions off-Broadway, off-Broadway, as well as site-specific. Erwin is the co-founding director of the Pan-African Creative Exchange, artistic associate and director of the Fellowship Program for the International Performing Arts for Youth, and the programming director of the Off-Broadway Origin Theatre Company. He's frequently invited director, facilitator, educator, and speaker for international cultural organizations, festivals, universities, congresses, and think tanks. And from 2016 to 2020, Erwin was the artistic creative director of the International Society for Performing Arts, ISPA. And from 2010 to 2014, he was the director of the Performing Arts for the Cultural Department of the Royal Netherlands Embassy and Consulates in USA, Dutch Culture USA. He currently teaches adjunct professor at CUNY Brooklyn College, an MFA in Performance and Interactive Media Arts program. Next, we have Guy de Lancey. Guy is an award-winning director, designer, and conceptual detective across many disciplines with a background in performance, human movement, and neuropsychology. He was awarded a collaborative research grant to attend Fabrica, the Badison Cross-Disciplinary Arts and Communication Research Center in Italy, under the directorship of Godfrey Reggio and Olivero Toscani. He also studied creative and screenwriting at NYU. With over 20 years in multiple forms of image and story-making practice, having worked in film and theater as a director, cinematographer, lighting and scenic designer, and technical design consultant, Guy is currently center lead for the Movement Laboratory for Research and Practice in Movement Technology at Barnard. And last, we have Sandy Garcia. Sandy became director of booking at Pentacle in 2016 after almost 2 decades of experience working with the major USA presenting organizations, artist management companies, and internationally renowned artists in dance, theater, visual performance, art, and music. Prior to joining Pentacle, she was a booking representative, international tour coordinator, and director of administration at Rainer Shagan Associates, where she represented a roster of world-renowned artists, including Cloudgate Dance Theatre of Taiwan, City Theatre Company, and Martha Graham Dance Company, among others. She's held positions as performer, mass smoker, and cow performances, among others, and is proud to be furthering Pentacle's mission of supporting artists in different stages of their career, by building a diverse roster of artists that more closely reflects the country's overall demographics, and is passionate about representing dance works with substance that makes audiences think and engage in the world. Thank you to all for joining us. I'm having other people coming in the arriving in my waiting room, so hence some of my gremlins there, I apologize. So lastly, Seth Soloway, Director of the Performing Arts, is here to guide us through the conversation. I'm going to turn off my camera and take on technical responsibilities. So Seth, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian, and good morning, everyone. I'm Seth Soloway. I'm the director of the Performing Arts Center here at Purchase. Ian has a lot of words to get in there, so I'm not ragging on him, but I certainly am not the director of all performing arts. I wouldn't assume to be. But we're very happy to be here again. As you can see, the theater behind us, this is not a virtual background. We are live in our concert hall. We are socially distanced. We're actually a good 16 feet apart, and our great director of production, Christy Havard, set this all up mostly before we arrived and retreated to her office. So we're practicing all safety. We all have our masks, but we thought we might as well use the theater. We thought it would feel good to be here, and we thought it would feel good for you to see us in the theater, even though we wish you were here with us. This is now our 5th coffee hour conversation, and they keep going because you keep asking for them. So we're so heartened to be able to just bring this conversation to light. And that is what it is. This isn't a webinar, and we always want to make that clear. Our vision for this is that this is the closest we can get to where, you know, as I'm looking across my screen, I should have been having coffee with Sandy in San Diego or with Laura in Philadelphia. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to have coffee and have a conversation. And the conversations are based on what you tell us you want to talk about. So we wanted to have a conversation today about the work that's being made during the pandemic, and specifically work that's being made that takes into account that this probably isn't a Band-Aid moment, that we need work that puts a good art out now, but then continues when we can go back into the theater. So we put together what we think is a great cross-section of people who can lead us in a conversation about this. Erwin and Guy, we were just beginning to work with as artists at the Performing Arts Center before the pandemic hit, partnering with a theater company from South Korea. So they bring a great artist perspective. And then Sandy and myself as facilitators who need to get the work out there. Sandy has been one of Purchase's greatest partners with our Rubber Band Dance project, and we had some really big projects in the works that we're still trying to keep going. So we thought there was a good connection here. I'm going to open the floor to our panelists, again, just to briefly introduce themselves and add anything, and then we'll go right into a few questions that I'm going to start with. But I'll say again, we want you to talk. So I have 5 or 6 prepared questions. I hope to only ask one of them. So Sandy, I'm going to go to you first, just to introduce yourself and anything you might want to add that Ian didn't say.
No, I think that Ian covered it all and then some. So I'm just, we had a pre-conversation in preparation for this, and I'm really excited to get the conversation going with Erwin and Guy and Seth. So yeah, I don't have anything to add to this at this point.
Okay. Guy, anything? You're muted, Guy.
There we go. Hello. Likewise, not much to add. I think it was covered. What I do is I work a lot. Erwin and I work a lot together, and I span the divide between doing a lot of research in technology and performance, and actually making things with Erwin. So that's really what I do.
And Erwin.
Yeah, ditto. He read quite a long statement there at the beginning, so I feel like that was pretty much covered. I will say clearly, both Guy and I come from a very international perspective. We work very internationally. We both are internationals in this country. And I think one of the things that is kind of a silver lining that I've seen in all of this is that idea of international has become a much more embraced by a lot of people, because all of a sudden it's so much easier to just have that conversation on an international scale, where beforehand maybe some people were still a little nervous to pick up the phone all the way to the other side, so to speak. Now it's become kind of like a norm, and so that's been quite interesting to see in the work of preparing work on an international scale also.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm sure we're going to delve deeper into that. So I'm going to start where I always start, which is the question that inspired us to have the conversation. So this session was called Building the Future Now. And what we are seeking to do is imagine a future for the performing arts that's built upon the challenges and innovations of the current cultural landscape amidst COVID-19. So I'm going to ask our panelists to start by responding to that to that statement. How are you imagining a future for the performing arts built upon these challenges? What innovations do you see within the current cultural landscape during COVID-19? So Erwin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, obviously we've had many conversations, again, on international platforms with regards to this, particularly in the very early stages, and they've been continuing. At the end of August, we had our Pan-African Creative Exchange, which is really a platform to highlight work from the African continent. And so obviously a lot of these conversations we were having there as well. I think one of the main things that I saw very quickly in the beginning was that it might not necessarily be so much what is on the stage, what we are actually presenting as this feeling of we want to gather, we want to get together again, and how do we do that in a virtual sense instead of just passively watching something on a screen. And so that, I think, has been a big part in the conversations that I've had with a lot of artists, where we, for example, also really look at the gaming industry, because they've been, of course, an industry that is a very screen-based industry, and yet where people feel very, very connected and feel very gathering together and very interactive. So I do feel there's a sense to more interactive experiences. In our call, prep call for this, we were mentioning also, let's face it, the performing arts were a little bit in a crisis already way before the pandemic. And in some ways, I think the pandemic has kind of like sped up certain things that people, and particularly artists,
Soloway, is it named my
engaging with.
That's
So
the guitarist you always worked with at the studio.
So with regards to interactivity and also accessibility, and that I think is going forward in the future, this idea of a hybrid between the live and the virtual is going to be quite interesting, I think, for anybody in this field, because clearly we are able now, through this virtual sense, to have an accessibility to so many people that might before not have had that accessibility to the art form. So I think that's one of the gathering side and the accessible side, I feel is two things that came out of this that really artists are investigating. On a personal note, interestingly, you say what has the pandemic now and looking forward. I've had actually the opposite effect that I was in a residency in Norway working on a project 2 years ago. And at that time, we couldn't find the right form for it. And then the pandemic hit and the producer and the designers came back together with me and we said, this is actually now the pandemic kind of gives us a perfect form for this. And we ended up creating a production remotely, me in New York, them in Norway, where we had a socially distanced performance in a abandoned dairy factory for audiences of 50. And it worked really, really well. It was sold out immediately. And lastly, currently I'm working on a project with somebody in Brazil, really focusing on this question that you're raising, Seth, which is looking at a project, it's called Playgrounds Everywhere, because the public space is now no longer accessible, particularly in Brazil, for many, many children. We are looking at how can we reinvent the playground in the house itself as part one, which is in a virtual sense, but immediately thinking as part two, what will that project then do when people can go back to school, can go back to the virtual, to the public space and to the theaters. So we are developing a project that starts off virtually and then will end up live, hopefully.
Thank you, Erwin.
Those are
So,
kind of things I'm working on.
I'm going to give the other folks a chance to respond, but I do want to highlight that certainly I hope we'll come back to this remote creation and your experience with that and what others have experienced, either artists themselves or producers, managers, agents, presenters working with artists who are trying to create in this remote environment. Because as we've talked about, Erwin, I'm just trying to teach on Zoom, and it's really hard. So I think we're interested to hear how that went, and also your thoughts around accessibility given the medium as it pertains to, I think, very importantly, how we as presenters start to think more broadly about our audiences. So I think we'll come back to those things. But I want to go to Guy now with the same question. But Guy, the way I'll slant it a bit is Erwin is coming at it, I think, largely from his perspective as a theater artist. I know you're working a lot on movement and how we deal with movement in this medium. So I'd love to hear from you from a movement perspective.
Well, for me, I've had a lot of questions about what movement is, and movement might not necessarily, in my opinion, be the movement of human bodies, but it could be the movement of a perspective when you're driving in a car or traveling. I think it's a far broader thing, but I have made copious notes based on what we've been speaking about. And part of what I love to do is research creativity and technology in general, as well as having a big, broad grounding in the theater and cinema too. And I can't help but think that where we are in theater is pretty similar to the moment when photography arrived for painting and representational art, and what the painters did in response to that. And what you found happening there was Impressionism, where the artists then, instead of trying to accurately represent visual reality, they try to represent an emotional, physical, and intellectual effect of pigment on surface. And I think the term that came up in our pre-conversation is that we are now undoubtedly in this kind of radical mixing of mediums. We are forced into it. And that has a similar feel to me, that we are now, in a sense, if you look at all these tiny squares we're dealing with, it is a form of Impressionism. So I have various examples. I've taken quite a few notes what I will do, I think the most efficient way to do this is to take these links that I've found to these particular examples. I'll post them in the chat, but a couple of things that came up from that is, I don't know if everybody's aware of the work of Katie Mitchell and live cinema in the UK. Very early on, pre-COVID, she started mixing cinematic art and theatrical art, and she would have performers with cameras filming each other on stage as part of the performance, and that would be projected. So already there was this kind of mix of mediums that was happening pre-COVID. There's another example called Darkfield. I'll speak about Darkfield. Is an anesthesiologist who decided he was more interested in theater than anesthetizing people, which is a very interesting combination of practice. They have created a form of theater in on-site specific type of theater, and what they were using were shipping containers. And have people heard of the Darkfield? Generally, but what was interesting about Darkfield is that they have now got to a place where they create theater in total darkness, and they're using spatial audio systems, because what and in fact they've done away in the COVID era with working in containers, and they've developed a thing called Darkfield Radio, which is an app that you can log into, and you can have a two-person experience. It's sold, you can go in from worldwide and you pay for it. So there's a financial model that could be investigated there. But what they have come up with, what the pair that created this have invented is a form of direct address, which I think is particularly interesting to the moment we live in, so that you could be totally intimate with somebody. Now there was something that came up yesterday with Sandy, where she brought up a phrase that was, what we are selling when we're working in the theater or presenting in theaters, we are selling exclusivity. Now, I think what this idea prompts for me is that what we could possibly be moving towards is selling intimacy. Make of that what you will. I think the Darkfield experiment prompts that idea. Another really interesting experiment, well, it's not an experiment, it's quite a successful thing. I think they even had a New York Times pick. It's a piece called Estate versus Natasha Bonina, which is by the Arlequin Players. I'll post the link to that, you can investigate it. But it was a simple production in which a couple, it was based on a Russian story. There was a woman in a corner of a room, and she was filmed, and she performed a piece with a huge screen, and people attended this performance. They sold the tickets at $27 each. And there was direct address again happening between her, and she was sort of looking at the audience as a jury. So once again, it's audience involvement, which is a new level that we might be entering into, that is of particular concern to us. But one of the interesting things that the director of this piece said was, he said, it is not a stopgap for what is happening now. This is going to stay, and it's going to evolve because it works, because it's impactful. So when you ask the question, Seth, about movement, it's an abstracted idea of the body moving. It's concepts and ideas and feelings moving and reshaping themselves that I'm really interested in addressing here with these examples. So I will either put this in a Word document, whatever people feel is more interesting, or I will post the link so that you can go and investigate those things separately. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's what I prepped.
That's okay, Guy. It gives us it's interesting when we start, because it's less of a question and more of a response to the title of the talk. It gives us a lot for for how we can continue the conversation. And I do agree. I think that this idea of access and intimacy is really, really important. I think I mentioned when we were prepping, and I'll mention for the group, because we learned something from it. One of the things we've been doing here is these interviews with some of the artists we're partnered with on Zoom. So we did one with Kyle Abraham, we did one with Doug Verone, and we have a few more coming. But what we've consistently heard as this has gone on is that people aren't that interested in the recording. They want to be in the Zoom room with the artist. And if they can do that, then they're interested in watching. So that's a good guidepost for maybe how we make some next steps. So I want to give Sandy the floor to respond to the title as well from your perspective. Sandy, I said you're here because I think you're doing this really well with your artists and helping them pivot. So what's your experience been, and what's your response to the title?
Thanks. Well, I mean, I feel like through these last 7 months, what I've had to learn a lot is patience. Patience in the process, and patience in everyone being in different places within this. This is a complete shift in kind of for presenting organizations and how they look at and engage with their audiences. And the same for a lot of the artists that I represent, which were very much, working on proscenium stages. I think that in these 7 months, the artists that have already been engaging in technology are really the ones that have been able to shift over a lot faster and be able to innovate and think outside the box a little bit more. The rest of us should really be looking at them as these examples of people that have been doing this and are probably ahead of some of the others. But even like within the artists, when I started thinking, this really is, virtual really is a way to continue to connect with audiences. It took some artists more time than others to really be able to wrap their heads around it. And I had to be able to give them that time to see what it is that they were actually interested in doing. And you can't force one thing into another. You need that time. You need that time also for your audience to grow and to understand this new model, for presenters to grow and understand this new model, and to experiment and to fail and to not get it perfect immediately the first time, but that if you don't take those risks and don't take those experiments to learn from them, then we're really not moving anywhere ahead of where we were 7 months ago. So with the artists, for the most part, when we started approaching the virtual, we really looked at it in that same way of intimacy, exclusivity, experience. We don't want to replace the proscenium work. We don't want to replace that experience, but what can we do virtually to continue to connect with the public, to actually invite them into the process, to use this time as an opportunity for them to learn about the choreographer's story, learn about the works that they're creating, and give them that. I feel like oftentimes with dance, the excuse has always been that that audiences don't understand what's happening and they feel disconnected. And so how do we use these virtual opportunities to make that connection with the audience? So for us right now, the technology that we're using is still a little, with Zoom, we're not as sophisticated. And that's, I think, one of the things where if we really are going to be looking at the virtual, there needs to be a real investment into having the field really, up to speed with what is possible and what is capable. But also, for us right now, it's creating these sort of intimate events, these experiences for audiences. And then hopefully once we're back in the theater, that we're still able to offer some of these as engagement activities, as ways for the presenter to have their audience meet the artist 6 months to a year beforehand. Be a part of that process. So once that artist is there in the theater, they've built a relationship with them. And I think that that's very important in audience building because, again, as we had just mentioned, we were in trouble before all of this happened. I think this is a big kick in the butt to wake us up and say, what are we doing? Now that we don't have our venue, how are we continuing to engage with our audience? How are we keeping them in the line and invested? So that's what we've been sort of developing and working on with some of the companies.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sandy. That's very well said, everyone. So I'm just looking across to see if I have any questions from any of you. Not yet, but I know they're coming. So so why don't we go this way? Why don't we stick along the lines of the way the conversation was going and where Sandy was going? So, you know, you talked about the engagement aspects, and we've talked a lot about here at Purchase. That's really all we've done virtually. We had a pretty robust community engagement program before this happened, which was lucky. We weren't as you know, ready to understand, you know, how to go virtual in terms of learning how to use Zoom and all that stuff. We've learned to do that, but we've only done the engagement. So what comes next, and how do we get there becomes an interesting question. And I really was taken by, so we spend a good amount of time prepping for these, and we're grateful to the panelists to do that. And we had a really great conversation about the next step to getting work out into the market, and how, admittedly, as a presenter, I'll put myself out there, it is a little bit hampered by things that we're not used to. We have much less money, so anything we do is a bigger risk, and we have no data, which, you know, data usually makes us very comfortable. And I think Sandy made an excellent point that we have to, at some point, we have to take the risk, step into the void, as Robin Williams would have said. So so to frame that into a question, and I think this is a place where maybe we can have a lot of dialogue. What do you guys see, and anybody here, what are the tools and skills that we're missing, that we don't currently have in the current model of how we facilitate performing arts getting out into markets? What are those tools and skills that we're missing, and how can we help each other build them in?
That's a big question, Mr. Soloway. No, I think, yeah, I don't know. I think, Sandy, I completely agree in looking at this as an opportunity in a way. I think in a lot of ways, we are all kind of in our own silos, and we all are thinking about what is important to us, so to speak. And yet, for example, before, I also teach, and a lot of the young artists, they're not at all making work for the 1,000-seat houses. Now that, you know, so there's already a disconnect there. Like, a lot of artists are trying to kind of shift that work away from there into other areas. A lot of audience, particularly younger audiences, are looking also for other means of engaging with artwork. But then there are, on the other side, there are people that are dependent on filling the seats in the big houses. So I think, in a way, the fact that we cannot fill those seats right now, we're not even allowed to fill those seats. So in a way, this is also a great opportunity to start taking those risks, or to go to artists that maybe people have never heard of before, and kind of look at what we can start a conversation with there. Because in the end, I think if people start to know the artist, people might get enthusiastic and might want to see more of the work. So that's a little bit where you, Seth, and I were talking about also with regards to presenters stepping in, or starting to work together with artists in sense of residencies or producing partners, where it becomes more about the collaboration aspect of it and the creation aspect than purely the presenting aspect of it. And I think that's a very interesting conversation to have, particularly right now. I think a lot of people on both ends of the spectrum are looking at ways, because money is an issue. So how can we really help each other out to develop new projects? And I do think that that by having more conversation across the board, that really would help a lot.
Thank you, Erwin. Anybody else want to chime in on that? We do have some good examples in the chat, and Laura, I don't know if you'll mind if I draw you out. I think what you put there is pretty excellent. And we were also talking recently about opening our minds to things like ants, where we may have normally gone, well, how do we sell seats for that? But now it sort of becomes the perfect kind of project. I think you have a lot of things like this. So I don't know if I can draw you out to speak to the example you put in the chat.
Sure. I have, I'm blessed with, like Sandy, artists with incredible brains and creativity, and many, many, many are leaping at the moment. So I feel like I almost have too many examples to put forward, but I did put in the chat in the spirit of engaging now with our audiences right this second in a way we never could before, in preparation and in quite intentionally to lay a better groundwork for them to then be with us in the live theater. I think that that's huge. And so the example I did put in the chat is one of our live engagements that has been transferred into virtual now, will be live in the future. But again, is there an opportunity here to attract people who never would have bought a ticket to go sit in a theater? Maybe they're interested because they're 25 and they actually live and die on their phone. And so they're perfectly happy to be on their phone. But those, we've been talking about the graying of our audiences for years. This is the opportunity for us to get the 20, 30 something kids, if you will, and to make sure that they are with us as hopefully we move into the future with back to live theater. Of course, there's the great outdoors, and the great outdoors can go way beyond a platform of, a built up wooden stage on a piece of grass. There's so much interactive theater available there, that can respect social distancing. It's just, the artists are making this work. I will put a link to the pandemic programming tab that's on my website, because we realized that we needed to make it really easy for people to see, to answer the question, what are artists making right now that I can present right now? So I'll add that later. But there you will see several examples, from outdoor theater to circus to straight up theater to dance, just so many virtual engagement opportunities.
That's great, Laura. Thank you so much. And I want to just, there's a lot we could highlight there, but one of the things that I think is important to highlight is that more and more I think I need to, and I think we all need to, I'm just looking at things like Laura's pandemic programming tab, and then having the conversation. I haven't had the conversation with Laura yet, but and I have engaged a few times around the idea of, information that addresses, fears I have to have representing an institution about, well, I don't really know what should it cost for, a Zoom masterclass or something like that. So just going into those conversations, acknowledging I really don't know, and maybe you don't know either, and let's figure out, where the value is between the artist and the institution. I've been having them. I think those are great conversations to have. I want to address Edward's question in the chat, and then maybe other people can join in, because I think I started on this at the beginning, but yes, we have held experiences like this with our constituent audiences. In the beginning, they really liked it, and now more and more, it's become not enough. It's become what we're talking about. They want access to the artist. They want to feel that intimacy. They don't necessarily want to watch a recording of me talking to Kyle Abraham, much as, it was a great conversation because, Kyle's brilliant and I just happened to be there. But when what they've specifically said is, it's interesting and I can watch it, but I would have been more motivated to show up at a certain time if I knew that I was going to be in the room with Kyle and I could ask him something at the end or follow up on something at the end. And the epiphany there is, well, of course, because that is what we do when we can bring an artist in residency. That's exactly what we do. We gather in a small space and we let the constituents ask their questions. So yeah, I think, Edward, there's certainly an element of us as the institution bringing the artist back to the forefront and then getting out of the way.
And I think, Seth, that speaks to that intimacy, that idea that, you know, back to the comment of, and this was something that I had heard from Capacity Interactive, where with presenters, what they thought they were selling was a seat in a brick and mortar theater. What they're selling is intimacy, exclusivity, an experience that's very unique. And you don't need a theater to provide that to an audience. So, you know, the idea of, and I just actually, it reminded me of, because I'm a BAM member, and so I get their emails, and I'll get an email saying, you know, limited capacity, you have to RSVP right now. And I always get in, and I'm like, I don't know if it really is limited capacity, but the idea that I get this email from them that's saying, if you want to watch this pre-screening or this artist talk with this director, you need to do it now because it's limited. And then I get the email saying that I got in. I feel very exclusive in that, and I engage in that experience. So I think that, you know, it's very savvy of them. I think they've got hundreds of people signing up to these things. But that is, I think that it is like the marketing. I feel like marketing wise, we're also as a field, we've always been so bad at marketing ourselves, at really valuing what we are providing. You know, artists do things for free because they just want to be seen and they just want someone to experience it. I think that we really have to go back and recognize that we have value. The artists have value. The presenting organizations have value, and what they provide to audiences is important. And we need to sort of stand behind that and not give it all for free. This is a very exclusive, wonderful experience that you're giving to people, especially right now when we're all stuck at home, to be able to engage with an artist. Why not put value on that and value our work?
Thank you, Sandy. I think that's incredibly well said, and I couldn't agree more. Certainly, you know, maybe all of us weren't always there, but I think 7 months in, we absolutely have to be there. So I think it's a good time to dig a little deeper then on creative process, not just for the artists that are with us, but also for all of us, because the artists create, of course, but when times are normal, you know, institutions like Purchase and others, we help, and the agents and managers that work with the artists, we help by setting up residencies and planning, and from my experience, that is how we tend to provide the intimacy and the access, right? We have a long-term residency with a group like Rubber Band. They live in the community for a couple of weeks, and we invite people in to rehearsals, to conversations, to all sorts of experiences that feel exclusive. So we have to replicate that now. So I'm interested to hear from you guys, what's working in starting us down that path? How can we do better? What has it been like to create remotely? And how can the theaters step back in to help, to give that same support to creation and that same, therefore, build in that access?
Yeah, for me, it's been really, really focused on the interactivity. I feel everything that has not been working as well has been putting something, you know, a registration of something on a screen. As soon as there's an interactivity, a liveness aspect to it, what is the new liveness in this virtual world? And even not only from a from an artist perspective, but also indeed from a presenting perspective, or theaters. I put one in the chat as well. Night Hotel, NITE. Night Hotel is a theater in Holland that just started doing this virtual presenting, and they've reached so many more audiences than they normally reach because it is virtual. I know that right this week, Theater Group Amsterdam is actually coming out with a new production in Amsterdam, and only, I think in Holland now you're allowed to have 100 people in a theater. I'm not quite sure, but the exact number. But they sell tickets for people to experience it live in the theater as well as at home. So they still have the live aspect of it. Now, of course, Ivo van Hove was a director already years ago that started doing a lot of cinematic work in his theater. So again, it does show that I think we would be silly to keep trying to make the work as if we were not using this medium right now. Right now, we have to use the medium of the screen. And so as artists, we have to also think about that as a screen. And what can you do with that? But like Laura said, and this is exactly the same project that I'm working on in Brazil, is we are thinking of ways of starting that engagement through the screen, but then how can it develop further on for a time when we can actually all meet again in a live space? And that is actually really exciting. And also from a marketing point of view, is you're engaging people with an artist that they might not know, but through the screen they get engaged with the artist, which might want them to buy a ticket later on, a year later, because by then they know the artist, to come into the space and meet the artist live. So there's, you know, it works both ways. And then there's, of course, also a lot of digital invention. Like, for example, we use the platform AirMeet, which is a different platform than Zoom, where you can actually sit at tables with each other. There's an actual stage, people can be on stage, but as soon as there's nobody on the stage, you only see the people that are sitting at your table. So you have this very intimate experience. There's something called Echo, where audience members create their own avatar, and they, you know, so they meet in the Echo space. So there's a lot of other platforms out there also to create that more intimate experience and that more interactive experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Erwin. Something that we're all engaged in that we haven't touched on yet is also work for young audiences, and how we continue to do work for young audiences in this space, and how important it is to specifically make sure that we do work that still goes into the classroom in whatever form the classroom is taking right now to keep the arts alive there and help teachers. So I'm gonna ask Joshua Kane to jump in to talk to us about his experiences. He's done a little bit of that with others.
Hi. I've been in dialogues with a number of presenters setting up residencies primarily in Wisconsin at the moment, as well as some dialogues with Seth and Ian. And the focus that I've been taking is, rather than looking at what we can't do effectively by Zoom, or trying to adapt what I've done currently in the past for Zoom, we're inverting the process and saying, what does Zoom let us do, which other formats don't? And in the work of putting together the residency, I'm discovering that a greater opportunity for intimacy is available for me as an artist to be interacting with students, with teachers, with audiences in general, including the fact that while doing it in my home, they actually are guests in my home, in my creative environment. One of the workshops that I have coming up, where I'll be doing a talk with theater students and English students, I'm inviting them to a session I'm calling Half-Baked, which is where I talk about how I create my ideas, and where at the same time, we're going to be baking Halloween cookies, because I'll be doing the Edgar Allan Poe show. So I'm going to be teaching them how to make sugar cookies, going through the process of taking them through a recipe, which I'll provide in advance. They'll be in my kitchen, but we're also going to talk about the creative process that I as an artist use in approaching material and making choices. And I feel that by letting them literally into my home, I can create the kind of relationships which will permit me to, one, create a true connection with people now. And that's value right there. Two, I'm giving them a chance to be outside of their bubble, which is what they're hungriest for, is the ability to have interaction with people beyond their immediate family, particularly students. They are tired of living with their parents in their bubble, tired of not having access to each other. They want new experience, new people, new ideas. Mostly what they really want, though, is to be seen. So instead of it being the sage on the stage, it will be much more of the guide by the side, creating dialogues and then spotlighting other people's contributions to the discussion. Because no one comes to the theater to get a deeper experience of me. They come to get a deeper experience of themselves. And we are the reflective point to give them that opportunity to have discussions. What my family is aching for most right now is not my being on stage, but my being in the audience in a room full of strangers who at intermission we are in fervent dialogue with, discussing fascinating ideas and stories, with like-minded people who came together for this event. It is that sense of community and coming together. The theater is my synagogue. It's where I go to explore rich ideas. And everyone else I've talked to is looking for that. Even if they weren't theater goers, they are looking for the experience that an art center event can create. So in designing the residencies, it is about making greater opportunity for their feedback, their dialogue, their space, their talking, their time. We can do much less, and smaller bites are part of the model as well. In one of the dialogues I'm having right now, which we're tying up the contract on, instead of my coming in and doing big 45-minute to 50-minute talks on creativity or strategies, I'm putting together 3 to 5 minute bites where I can come in live to a meeting of teachers or parents who are looking to get creativity running in their household, or classrooms of students. But where it's 3 to 5 minutes where I can have a strong enough and potent enough anecdote followed up by an aha moment for the people listening, or the potential for one, and then a teeny tiny opportunistic assignment that's suggested where they could take it further if they choose. But not making it work, making an opportunity to be a vitamin B shot in the larger program of what's happening to get the greater muscle work of that body working. The other aspect that I'm working with in coming into work educationally with art centers is my title is not artist. My title is Director of Imagination / Lighthouse. And I'm coming in under that educationally for 2 reasons. One is coming in under an educational contract means that the entertainer's tax will not apply for those states. I'm coming in as an educator. I'm not coming in as an entertainer. I'm still coming in as an artist. And that percentage does make a difference. The second phrase is lighthouse. The lighthouse, particularly for those of us in New England, has great resonance. It stands tall on the rocks in the worst storms and shines its lights out for others to see, to be guided to safety. I am a white, cis male. I am safe. I have a wife who has health care. I have an apartment I live in. I am safe. My life is not nearly as threatened. My career is not nearly as threatened as so many of my compatriots. I am not going to fall and die. I feel dreadful some days, but I'm not going to fall. As the lighthouse, my job is to shine the light on what's working and who's working well in the organizations I'm working with. So if I come in and do my job well enough at a university working for the Art Center should now not be on the cutting block if I've done my job well enough, because I've shown light on what they are doing effectively, how they can engage other departments, how they can reach out to the community and create those tentacles and trails, those veins into the community, so that the Art Center is the hub on the wagon wheel, and all the spokes are going out, so all roads leading to Rome, or from Rome in this case. So as the lighthouse, I feel that we as the artists in the Art Center, we get to take our safety and shine light on others. We're in the high holidays right now, Jewish-wise, and there's a story that always moved me, which was the idea of Joseph had a great light about him, my rabbi had mentioned, and his brothers felt in shadow, so they threw him in a pit. What would have happened if Joseph had taken that light and shown it on his brothers to show what worked well about them, who they were as people? They wouldn't have had the same family dynamics, and they wouldn't have thrown him in the pit. I feel the way that we keep the arts from being on the cutting block is to use our light, our ability, our fervent creativity that even when we're starving is still evident, to shine light not just on us, but on those who need the support and don't know it yet. I genuinely believe in that phrase that you can get any idea accomplished if you're willing to share enough credit. And I believe that as the arts and the Art Center and the artists, we can regenerate what we need to do and be relevant by reestablishing the relevancy and the necessity of others.
Thank you,
Yay!
Josh.
That was beautiful.
That's very well said. I don't know how I can follow that up. There's so much that resonates there, and of course, one thing that sticks out for me is that what you said about the experience of being in the theater and how we all miss that. It takes me back to the beginning, where I think Sandy was talking about, the issues of audiences, steering away from modern dance because they don't understand it. And I really miss those challenging conversations with my audience members because they always lead to something great. So not to
Seth, I know I gave you a lot there, but to put it into the smallest phraseology, to create as many kitchen table conversations as we can. We used to have the in the car moments on public radio where we knew the public radio program was good if you stayed in your car to finish it. My goal right now is to help you, the art centers, and help my fellow artists, agents, and producers find ways to create kitchen table moments where, because right now at the kitchen table, everybody has their computers set up and they're going to YouTube. They're sharing clips, they're sharing small moments, they're watching Trevor Noah and John Oliver for their news. Entertainment is how we are getting through the most difficult information right now and the ideas. So I would love to help spearhead with the people who are here ways that we can succeed together, because the only way we are going to success will breed more success. We have to get away from the competitive mindset that we have had as an industry of there being only so many slots available to sell shows into and have bookings for our artists. We need collectively to let go of that right now, because we are in a place right now where people are saying we're on the edge of going under. I see it the other way. We are on the edge of becoming far greater than we ever had before in our potential to influence people's lives and be recognized for it. So if we can help everybody succeed well in all of their artistic interactions right now, it will create a need and a hunger for more of that. One good massage has the client wanting another.
I have to agree with that as well. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. And I'm sorry to have to wind that up, but I will say, the concept of the kitchen table conversation is certainly what this effort was all about. Specifically, Erwin and Ian and I really bonded over that concept year over year, and others that are here who I'm not going to be able to name everyone at the IPA conference. We always enjoy those kitchen table format conversations. It's exactly what we're trying to do here. And so, please join us. Give me an idea for the next topic. Host the next one. We're open to it all to keep this conversation going. I want to touch on one more thing that I think is important from our prep, and then I'll wind us out with a last statement from all of our wonderful panelists who gave a lot of time to this. But as we prepared for this, we realized that we can't talk about this without addressing some of the elephant in the room, and that is how we fund some of these projects. We had a session early on about some funding opportunities. It may be time to have another one because things have certainly changed. We know there are challenges. I'm interested in success stories, so I would just share here for specifically for other presenters that what we're doing here is trying to raise restricted dollars to fund our projects. Restricted dollars, regardless of what type of an institution you're part of, as we know, they then have to go to the project. So that's a beautiful thing. We've been fortunate to get some money from our county, and we're now going back to some of our foundations for bigger asks. So the things I would encourage people is there is some money that's flowing from at least New York State. So I would check with your state or county arts council to see if there are opportunities. But I would also, to the tenor of the conversation, encourage you to go into conversations with funders talking about what you're doing now, because we were scared at first, oh, well, we can't do what we did last year and they're not going to fund us. And we found that actually they've been very open to conversations about how we're adjusting and how we can use the money now to keep the arts alive, keep our institutions alive, and, go on the great journey that Joshua was talking about. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything there. We only have a couple of minutes, but it came up in the prep, so I wanted to at least touch on what we've been doing and what's been successful in terms of bringing in some restricted dollars to start to fund putting more of this great work out there. Okay, good. So so I want to go back. Maybe I'll go back first to Guy, and we'll switch up the order. Just any final thought for us? You're muted.
I think this follows on from Seth's point. I think I'll be brief, wonderful opportunity we have now is Zoom is a platform. We accept that we are in a mix of mediums, which is theater, the internet. The opportunity we really have here is to increase ubiquity, pretty much like Silicon's app development business model. Jeff Bezos lost money for 2 years. Look where he is now. I don't know how that would fit with arts funding, but create very focused content, make it fascinating, and increase the ubiquity of the platform or whichever way you put it out there. I think that is the interesting gap we face.
I agree. Thank you. And I think that extends to something we didn't really touch on, but we talked about a lot in the prep, which is widening our mind for who the audience is, given the platform. Erwin.
Yeah, it's I don't want to keep repeating, but I do feel the interactivity and the accessibility is a silver lining with regards to what is being created at the moment and how we can reach our audiences. And then I am very excited even to be part of this conversation because I don't think artists very often have the opportunity to speak to a whole group of agents or presenters. We are very often quite removed from that. And I think this conversation, getting these people together and even presenters working together potentially to support an artist or a project, I think is a very exciting prospect of what is now starting to happen. We're all forced to think differently. And I think, like I said, before the pandemic, basically within the field, people were already saying we have to start think differently. And now we're just forced to do it. So I think there's a silver lining to that for sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Erwin. And last but certainly not least, we'll wrap up with Sandy.
Oh, no. I mean, I would just say that I think that when 7 months ago, the response had been that we need to support artists, that artists were in trouble and we all had to rally behind them and support them. And I feel that over the course of the 7 months, we've steered away a little bit from that, and that we need to continue that focus, that the artists are the ones that need our continued support, need our resources, funding from funding organizations, presenters, to really invest in them right now to create these new models. They're the creative thinkers. So, you know, I've been having some conversations in which we're moving into the virtual, and in the conversations with an organization, it's, well, we'll work with you on this virtual, but we need to make money out of this if this ends up being developed into something else. And I feel like sort of this capitalist model of wanting to make sure you get a piece of the pie as this develops is really detrimental to what is possible. And for all of us, like, we need to just stop being short-sighted. I mean, Pentacle in the booking roster is making no money for at least 2 years. And yet, if I'm not there to continue to support these artists and to give them what I can give them to continue to think and be creative and build, then there's no point to continuing to do this. So I feel like, again, we had talked about supporting artists 7 months ago. We need to continue to support them, support their creativity. And that's all I can say.
Thank you, Sandy. That's very, very well
Sorry,
said.
not very eloquent, but
no, that's perfect. That was perfect. And Erwin and Guy, all of you, thank you for your thoughts, your information, your knowledge, and your important and powerful words, and all of you for being here, for the words that were shared, and also just for listening and being part of a conversation. I think conversations are key, and my wind up to this would be that that's where it starts. A lot of places my mind has been opened by calling someone like Sandy or another partner and saying, you know, let's just get on a Zoom with Ian and I and you and the artist, and let's have a conversation and figure out what's possible. And things always come out of that. So so that's my end thought. Thank you all so much. And I want to, again, before I hand it back to Ian, recognize in this moment especially, it's a great joy for me to be able to do this, but I've got a fantastic team here at the PAC that really makes this happen. I can't list them all because I'll forget someone, and that would be awful, and we have to go, but I want to thank the team here at the PAC for making this all possible, and I'm going to give it back to Ian to wind this out. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to everybody, Guy has sent me a great list of links of the things he was talking about earlier, and I've been unable to put them in the chat for reasons to do with our Zoom account with Purchase, I've learned in the last half hour. So I will be sending them out later today. There'll be in a follow-up email, all those links. If you haven't seen them in the chat, they will be coming to you. And I want to publicly apologize to Guy that I wasn't able to do that during this meeting. Okay. Otherwise, look for the survey, and the follow-up email will be coming out later today. That's it. Thanks, everybody.